It's human sacrifice. It's dogs and cats living together. It's mass hysteria, biblical proportions in college football with the transfer portal, and it certainly felt that way with Pitt yesterday. It certainly felt that way around the country with college football as players all over the place going into the transfer portal. It started in the last week or two. Guys started trickling in, but man, it landed full force yesterday as the world of college football was sort of put on its edge. All the coaching searches and all those different other things going on, bowl preparation, college football playoffs, conference championship games, all those things took a back seat to all the news coming out of the transfer portal yesterday. It was crazy, and it certainly happened at Pitt with 7 players going into the portal yesterday. So we're going to talk about those 7 players, what it means for Pitt to lose those guys, and what this whole situation means for Pitt and the rest of college football moving forward on the Morning Pitt Portal podcast, brought to you by BackshoreApparel.com, here on YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Yeah, it's our Thursday podcast. It's YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com. It's the Morning Pitt. You know what we always ask you to do? Like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel, YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com, so you don't miss any of our exclusive Pitt video content. We have Morning Pitt videos every day of the week. We have the live stream that we do every Wednesday night at 8:30. We did one last night. We had a great crowd. We had a lot to talk about, and it certainly brought the people out. We had a good conversation, me and Jim Hammett, for an hour. We do that every Wednesday night. We'll have some post-game shows as well after the basketball games, and we do it all here at YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Once you subscribe, you can turn on notifications and get an alert sent to your phone whenever we go live or we post new video content. You don't have to miss any of it because you will know at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. And then the website, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com, the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet, football, basketball, and recruiting. You find it all at Panther-Lair.com and message boards to talk to other Pitt fans. All day, every day, Pitt fans are talking to other Pitt fans on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. And the message boards have been lively. You know, I thought last night, or Tuesday night, I should say, when they lost to Missouri was, that was a rough one. That really got the conversations going. People were really falling off a cliff on that one. And then yesterday happened. And then all the transfers, 7 guys going into the transfer portal. And I have to, a real quick aside. All right, a little peek behind the curtain. A peek. Get that? Behind the curtain. I tape these videos the night before. Typically, I don't wake up at 4 in the morning and record a Morning Pitt video and release it at 5. I'm usually up around that hour, but I'm not inclined to dive into the Panther-Lair studios and make a lot of noise yelling about Pitt sports at 4 or 4:30 in the morning. So I record these the night before, and usually I'm pretty safe as far as news goes. There's not a lot that usually breaks between the time I tape these things and the time that we release them in the morning. But given the way yesterday went, given the way Wednesday went, I'm recording this with 7 guys in the transfer, having left Pitt to go to the transfer portal. It's entirely possible that by the time you watch this video, by the time I release this video, more guys will have gone in. And if that happens, we'll talk about it on tomorrow's Morning Pitt. But for now, the number is 7. So we're going to focus on those guys. And that's what we're going to do here on the Morning Pitt Portal podcast, brought to you by Backshore Apparel. And this is pretty cool to have our good friend Mike from Backshore Apparel sponsoring us here for these portal podcasts. I think maybe we'll try and make this a regular occurrence. We'll see if Mike wants to do it. But Backshore is really cool. I talked about this on the post-game show after the Duke game. BackshoreApparel.com. First of all, Mike is a big Pitt fan, all right? And he started this line of different things, shirts and hats. I've been really checking out the hats lately. They're very, very cool. It's at BackshoreApparel.com, and it's sort of beachwear, but it could be golf wear. You got to check out the hats. I'm looking at the one right now that is actually called Hail. It's a Backshore hat called Hail, and yeah, that's a Pitt reference. You got to check out the sweet blue color, and these hats they're breathable, they're durable, they're quick dry, they're lightweight, they're moisture wicking, they look buoyant, so if you lose them in the water, I guess they'll float. They're just really, really cool hats. He's got a lot of cool stuff there. The Hail one is really sweet. There's a black one. There's a straw hat. And like I say, he's a big Pitt fan. So go check out BackshoreApparel.com. He has a promo code HAIL10, HAIL10, that you can use when you go to BackshoreApparel.com. And I think you'll really like it. It's not specific Pitt gear, but it's really cool hats and shirts from a Pitt fan. And he's supporting the podcast, these portal podcasts that we're doing here. And so I highly recommend you check it out. You go over to backshoreapparel.com, and I think you're going to find something that you like, because Mike has done some really cool stuff there at backshoreapparel.com. So thanks to Mike for sponsoring the podcast and being a part of it. Let's talk about portal edition. 7 guys went into the portal, or well, I guess I forget if they all. No, they didn't all go in yesterday. I'm losing track of my days. Brandon George went in earlier in the week, and then 6 guys went in yesterday. The number is now 7. The number of players Pitt scholarship players who have gone into the portal, the transfer portal, this offseason, this week, really, is 7. In no particular order. Bengali Kamara, DeAndre Jules, Nate Temple, Buddy Mack, Aiden Henningham, Stephon Hall, and Brandon George. 7 guys. 1, 2, 3, 5 of them, I believe, or 4 of them seniors, guys who had one more year of eligibility to come back as a super senior to play that COVID year. Kamara, Jules, Temple, and George. The other guys with multiple years of eligibility remaining, all moving on for probably a variety of reasons. And I think when you look down this list, you do see guys moving for different reasons. You could pick a guy like Stephon Hall. And Steph Hall is interesting. Guy out of Central Valley, came in the 2021 recruiting class. Got overshadowed in that recruiting class locally by Donovan McMillan as the more premier safety prospect, but was a really, really good player at Central Valley. Steph Hall was. And I think the Pitt coaches had really high expectations for him. When you talk to them in the spring, when you talk to the Pitt coaches in the spring, and they were looking to replace Eric Hallett and Brandon Hill, they said, we've got 4 safeties and we feel great about all of them. And it was Javon McIntyre and PJ O'Brien and Donovan McMillan and Steph Hall. And it really sounded like there would be a 4-man rotation, that it might not be 2 in, 2 out sort of a line change, but it would be, mixing and matching. And a couple guys were cross-trained playing different positions, and guys could do this or they could do that. And they were all going to play, and they were all going to play a lot. But pretty quickly after the season started, by the Cincinnati game at the latest, it became clear that it was really a 3-man rotation, that it was Hall, or it was not Hall, it was McIntyre, it was McMillan, and it was O'Brien. And Hall was the odd man out. And he continued to play on special teams, but really didn't see much time on defense, really for pretty much the whole season. And so one of the complicating factors for him is that O'Brien, McIntyre, McMillan all came in they were all in that 2021 recruiting class. And I think O'Brien might not have redshirted. So he might have been a junior this past season, as opposed to the other 2 were redshirt sophomores. So they've got more eligibility, but they were all the same class as Hall. And so you could say, if it's a younger player and he's not at the top of the depth chart, or he doesn't feel like he's going to get a playing time opportunity, you say, okay, well, you might have to wait your turn. You might have to wait 2 years, or a year or whatever it is behind these other guys, and then it'll be your shot. But it would be hard for a guy like Steph Hall to look at McMillan, McIntyre, O'Brien and say, they're all going to be here as long as I am. There's no waiting out after them unless they all leave for the NFL in a year, which probably isn't going to happen. So if you're Steph Hall, you looked at it and said, I need a chance to play. And I think Steph Hall is a good player. I think he'll find an opportunity to play, and I think he'll play and contribute at another school. I don't know what level he'll go to, but I think he'll play and contribute at another school. Buddy Mack and Aiden Henningham, similar situations, not entirely the same. They were 2 guys who were just not playing. Buddy Mack I think he was on special teams this year. Aiden Henningham hasn't played a snap on defense or special teams in the last 2 seasons. He played as a true freshman in 2020. I think he played in all 11 games on special teams. Played in a handful of games in 2021 on special teams. Hasn't played at all in the last 2 years. Buddy Mack has had some injuries. They both had injuries, actually. Henningham is a linebacker. Mack, a safety who moved to linebacker and then moved back to safety. I don't mean to check my phone while I'm doing this, but you get notifications from Twitter or X or whatever it's called, and I have notifications turned on for a lot of guys on Pitt's roster. And so if I see my phone go off with the notification from Twitter, I got to make sure that it's not a portal entry, because this is how it's going to be. This is what it was last night on the live show. Jim and I were constantly looking at our phones to see if anybody went into the portal. But Henningham came to Pitt as a wide receiver prospect, played receiver for a little bit, moved to linebacker. Mack came to Pitt as a safety, played safety for a little bit, moved to linebacker for a little bit, moved back to safety. Neither one really made an impact. Neither one was in the rotation of their position. As thin as Pitt was at linebacker this season, Aiden Henningham never got on the field. And kind of like Steph Hall was closer in the safety rotation than Buddy Mack was. So, and I already said that Steph Hall left because he wanted an opportunity to play, you would think. Buddy Mack looking at the same thing. I would expect Mack and Henningham at the least to probably transfer down a level. I would think Hall probably will as well. I'm not sure if he'll get another Power 5 opportunity. I don't know if he has enough tape to really get himself a Power 5 opportunity, but we'll see. And you move into the 4 seniors then, and Nate Temple deciding to transfer for his final year of eligibility feels a little bit like John Morgan to me, except Nate Temple was less productive than John Morgan was. Nate Temple this past season was less productive than John Morgan was over the last couple of years at Pitt. Ultimately, Morgan went to Arkansas and put up about the same numbers that Nate Temple put up this year. Neither guy was really all that productive as a defensive end. And I think Temple, I think there was a hope that he would really contribute this year. And he played a lot, had a couple sacks, didn't really do a whole lot. But the thing with John Morgan leaving last year is I think the expectation was that younger players would step up into his role and they would have guys who would sort of take a big step forward and establish themselves. Whether, primarily Nakai Johnson probably was the guy they were circling as he's going to take a big step. He's going to be ready to contribute. He's going to be ready to play as a third-year player. He's going to take that next leap, that giant leap forward. But it didn't really happen. Nakai Johnson barely played. And as a result, Nate Temple ended up playing a lot. Bam Breema ended up playing a lot. Eventually, Sam Okunlola and then by the end of the season, Jimmy Scott got themselves into the rotation. But Nakai Johnson never really did that. If they had known that Nakai Johnson wasn't going to take a big step, maybe they bring John Morgan back for another year. As opposed to sort of, I don't know if you want to call it nudging him out the door, ushering him out the door, whatever they ended up doing. But it sort of feels like Nate Temple probably got a similar probably had a similar situation. Brandon George, I wonder about. I wonder if he was sort of ushered out the door himself. Pitt doesn't have any experience at middle linebacker heading into next season. But at the same time, I think we would all agree that Pitt's best middle linebacker under Pat Narduzzi was Servassier Dennis, who was an outside linebacker, who just moved inside to the middle. To some extent, I don't think that big thumping middle linebacker that everybody still thinks you need in a 4-3 defense, I don't know if that's really the case anymore. I think athleticism is more important than size and run stuffing, even though obviously those are important elements for this defense. But I think the athleticism is more important, and I think the Pitt coaches are content to move somebody like a Kyle Lewis or Jordan Bass or Servassier Dennis before into that role. So that's what you lose with George is that experience at middle linebacker. They'll find other guys to play there. It cuts the numbers down. You know what I mean? Like that's one less linebacker from a group that was relatively thin this year, loses Shane Simon, now has lost Brandon George, and also has lost Bengali Kamara. And Kamara is a little bit of a surprise to me. I thought he would come back for one more year and try to, realize some of that potential, achieve some of that potential that he has shown. I'll be the first to admit I drove the Bengali Kamara hype train even more than the Bub Means hype train. And while the Bub Means hype train eventually pulled into the station, the Kamara hype train crashed into the GD Mountain. That never worked out. Now, of course, when Kamara goes to another school, I will monitor his progress diligently every week to see if he finally comes into his own, but it just never happened this year. He was injured for a little bit, and he just never really played up to the level that I think he was capable of playing with his athleticism and his size. He's built like an NFL guy. He can run. It just never came together for him out there. Do I think the Pitt coaches encouraged him to leave? I can't really see that happening. I think they probably wanted him to be part of the mix next year at linebacker, but he's going to go somewhere else. I would think he should be able to end up at a Power 5 school We'll see. We'll see where he goes. I don't think there's too many guys out of these 7 that will end up at Power 5 schools. I think Brandon George, maybe like a Rutgers or Maryland type of play. Like I don't think he's going to go to Penn State or Ohio State or Michigan. I would say he's probably not. I would say he makes at best a lateral move from Pitt if he stays in the Power 5, and maybe drops down to a lower level Power 5 or drops out of Power 5 altogether. Bengali Kamara, I would say about the same thing. Nate Temple, Buddy Mack, Aiden Henningham, even Steph Hall, probably not going to Power 5 schools, but I mean, we'll see. We'll see. And then there's DeAndre Jules. And this was probably the one that surprised me the most. This was a guy who, out of all 7 of these guys, had a surefire, locked-up starting spot heading into next season. I mean, say what you want, and I've said a lot about guys like Devin Danielson and Tyler Bentley and David Green, and the very little that they produced. They were not productive players. They were not stat sheet stuffers over the course of their careers at Pitt. But they were guys, and they were bodies, and they were playing, and they're all gone. And what's left is not a lot. What's left without those guys was going to be DeAndre Jules, Elliot Donald, Sean Fitzsimmons, Isaiah Neal, and then the incoming freshmen. And the incoming freshmen look good, but that's not a lot of depth and not a lot of guys with experience. I already said, like last week I was saying, they needed a defensive tackle out of the transfer portal, and that was when I thought DeAndre Jules was coming back. He was pretty much guaranteed a starting job among that group and a heavy role in the rotation among that group. Now he's gone, and you're looking at Donald, Fitzsimmons, and Neal. You need at least 1 defensive tackle, if not 2, in addition to some of the needs that you have at defensive end and cornerback, and and not even getting to the offensive side of the ball. Jules is the one that I look at and I say, what was the motivation here? Because it's not like you were leaving for playing time. It's not like you're leaving for better coaching. You've got Charlie Partridge, one of the best defensive line coaches in the country. You know the defense. You know Pittsburgh. You seem happy in Pittsburgh. It doesn't seem like there's any issues there. So why does DeAndre Jules leave Pitt? DeAndre Jules is a guy who was a part-time starter this past season, put up decent numbers, but not an All-American, not an All-Conference player, not even an All-Conference honorable mention at defensive tackle. And leaves Pitt to enter the transfer portal for his final year of eligibility. 1 year left. Finally has a breakout season, and he's gone to the portal? What's that about? I think, and I can't say this 100%, but I'm confident enough about it that it's more than just throwing out like gossipy rumors. I think it was NIL and enticements and inducements. I really do. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think everybody should get theirs. If you have the opportunity to get something, you should get it. If you have the opportunity to get some sort of compensation for the work you are putting in, you should get that compensation for the work you are putting in. But here's the thing. We're talking about a part-time starter, rotational defensive tackle, moderate production, 1 good season, 1 productive season. And that's the kind of player that's drawing NIL inducements and NIL offers. And none of this is meant as a slight to DeAndre Jules or a criticism of DeAndre Jules. I mean, I just spent a lot of time talking about how important he would have been to Pitt's defensive tackle rotation. But if that's the level we're operating on now, that schools and their collectives operating on behalf of those schools are making strong enough NIL offers that you can get what may ultimately turn out to be a backup defensive tackle at your school. What are we doing? Is this what the world is now? Because it was one thing when it was Jordan Addison. It was Dylan Gabriel. It was Caleb Williams. It was Max Johnson. Riley Leonard, Sam Hartman. Brennan Armstrong. It was one thing when and not even Armstrong actually is not a great example, but it was one thing when these were the guys getting enticed with the NIL offers. These were the guys that were sort of operating in this world of pseudo free agency in college football. It was one thing when it was the Biletnikoff Award winner, and it was a guy who was one of the best players in the country at his position, and star players who can really make an impact and turn around your team. It's like, we need that one guy. We get that quarterback, man, we are golden. We get this guy, we get that guy, we are golden. We get that star player, that stud, or even those 5 studs, and we are on a roll. But we're talking about what could potentially end up being your number 4 defensive tackle, maybe your number 3 defensive tackle, maybe your number 5 defensive tackle. And a player in that role is getting that kind of attention. I've always, tried to hold back from overreacting to the entire situation, the transfer portal and NIL and what it means for college sports, and it's the doom of this and it's the end of that. It's the mass hysteria and the dogs and cats living together and human sacrifice and all those different biblical things. I've tried to pull back from that. Easy, guys. Easy, fellas. It's not that big a deal. This thing will moderate. The market will set itself. It'll operate like any other marketplace, and any other free market, and it'll find its level. It's not going to be crazy forever. No, it has only gotten crazier. It has only gotten more out of control, more unreasonable, less rational, and just completely insane. I think that was a pretty moderate response. Calling something completely insane. And again, there's nothing against DeAndre Jules. Again, I think he could have gotten a fairly solid NIL deal to stay at Pitt, and it would have been money well spent because they need him to lead the defensive tackles. They need him to be the number 1 defensive tackle and play next to a transfer who comes in so that Fitzsimmons and Neil Donald could work in that rotation with those guys and not have to be the starter, but be a solid second team group. But if schools are out there and collectives are out there using NIL to get borderline starters from another school just to fill in the depth with beyond competitive NIL opportunities and offers, I said on the live stream last night, I don't like saying things like, what are we doing here? But honestly, what are we doing here? Where are we headed? Is the only realistic endpoint to this whole thing being the players getting paid a salary, which I ultimately think will happen and ultimately think should happen. The players should be paid salaries and put under contracts with all the ups and downs that come with that. Because guess what about a contract and a salary? You can get fired. But we'll have that conversation another day. But it feels like that's the only way this is going to end. With transparency, structure, an actual free agency period, real free agents, contract free agents, and contract athletes and contract salaries. Or else, because otherwise you are going to have this sort of insanity. And it might even reach a point, like if we don't get salaries in the next 5 years, it might actually reach a point where even the schools that are spending like crazy, that are out of their mind lunatics, might reach a point where they say, okay, we can't do this every year. We can't spend 20, like donors and boosters might get to a point where they say, we can't spend $20 million every year on our football roster. We just can't. Like it's diminishing returns. It's just not feasible. Now, it's college sports, which is the most insane sport in all of, maybe the world, but certainly America. And college football is as crazy as they come. And the most ardent, fanatical college football fans really are that crazy. So maybe they'll be able to hold on for more than 5 years. But there's an end point. At some point, the money runs out, or the money that's available to spend on things like this does run out. It's not like a TV contract that keeps paying you every year so you can then distribute that revenue to the student athletes. But maybe short of salaries, I don't know what really curtails this or puts it in anything approaching a reasonable, rational system with transparency and accountability and just something approaching a level playing field. I don't really know what else could do it other than structured salaries. But we're not there yet. So this list of transfers here, it's going to keep growing. For better or for worse. And it will keep growing because they need room just to fit the recruits and all the transfers Pitt wants to bring in. So, yeah, they're going to lose more guys. They might lose as many as 10 more guys. And it doesn't necessarily mean the program is falling apart as much as some of the guys got to go to make room for the other guys they need to bring in. Remember, there's 85 scholarship players. They're not all on the 2 deep. And that's just the cold, hard reality of college football right now. All right. It's Thursday. We're almost at the end of the week, folks. And look, today is probably going to be crazy just like yesterday was. Maybe we'll see some movement on the offensive coordinator search. Maybe we'll see more transfer portal options. We'll see. But it's certain to be crazy, and it is certain to be, I can't really use the word fun, but it's going to be interesting. It'll be interesting. Tomorrow, we got the Morning Pitt mailbag right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Special thanks to Mike at Backshore Apparel. Make sure you check out the website, BackshoreApparel.com. They sponsor this Morning Pitt Portal podcast. There's a lot of P's to say, but it's a lot of fun to do. And believe me, Backshore's got some great hats and great stuff you need to check out. Go to BackshoreApparel.com. You'll see it and you'll be like, oh, yeah, this stuff's really cool. I need one of these hats. Because I'm kind of saying it to myself. So BackshoreApparel.com, go check them out for sure. And, of course, check out the website Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. Like this video and subscribe, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. You never miss any of our Pitt video content. Morning Pitt mailbag coming tomorrow, so be sure you tune in for that. Enjoy your Thursday, and we will talk to you tomorrow for the Morning Pitt right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.